And I think that's really the situation, but there's so much romanticism around the industry as a whole, where people are looking at it as like a chance to escape the rat race, to break from this or that. And it's just like, no, it's just an off ramp that immediately takes you back onto the highway that is capitalism. So I feel like, just being mindful, and I think viewing it from a lifestyle perspective is, I think, helpful, because that's the reality of it.
Everyone knows that food is cool. No secret. Eat that food with a bowl and spoon. Everyone knows that food is cool. No secret. Eat that food with a bowl and spoon.
Hello, and welcome to With Bowl and Spoon. My guest today is an old intern of mine. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
What's going on, Shelly? My name is Ahmed Tacumba Turner Jr. Most people know me by Tacumba, infamous food space. So yeah, excited to be here today.
I'm so glad that we found the time and we found the space to be able to meet. When you came to work with me very briefly,
like a month and a half.
City Point, was it a month and a half? It was like, I just remember you saying like, oh, I'm only going to be here for a short amount of time. And I was like, oh my gosh, how do we pick what to show you and what to like stuff into your brain in that short amount of time we had. But yeah, you wanted to learn about urban agriculture, and then you went off to Bidwell Training Center. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, by the time I met you, what was this, 2016, I want to say?
Yep, could have been. I'd have to look back at my notes.
It's been about 3 years since I've been out of high school. I attended Slippery Rock straight out of high school for environmental science. And during that time, I became really interested around like public health, and that kind of informed my decision to leave, ultimately come back home and try to find like a vocation that really aligned with what my interests were. So when I was able to learn about Bidwell and horticulture technology program, that really became like a priority. So it just so happened that y'all were gracious enough to have me, despite having this commitment I was going into, where I was able to, I think, continue to foster like a deeper understanding around like the way in which areas that are blighted come to be, some of the systemic factors that go into that, and like how specific interventions around like vacant lot reclamation, urban agriculture, and things of the like can have an impact on some of those issues. So yeah, it was just like a very interesting time. But as I think about it now, I think that was a pretty informative experience, be able to work with you and assist with, at that time, the initial phases of Adopt a Lot process. It was like white paper phase. So that was cool. 2016.
Yeah. Came a long way, didn't it?
Yeah, and to see that be implemented and widespread, and a lot of people were able to benefit from using that program. So yeah, I think that's a really cool time period. Something I think about, and I can see how that informed what I would later go on to do, and kind of how I think about some of this work. So yeah, so I mean, since then I've gone on to work for GTech, aka Grounded Strategies, Grow Pittsburgh, Oasis Farm and Fishery, and now I'm at Operation Better Block, serving as the program manager for Green Initiatives, where I oversee a year-round workforce development program where students engage in all kinds of like project-based initiatives, such as like they manage a garden, we have air monitoring projects, tree planting initiatives. So I'm still involved with some food access work to this day. Been on 8 years now.
Yeah, it seems like when you started, like you were gathering information.
Yeah.
When you came to city planning and you were like, I just want to learn some stuff, and then you went to Bidwell and you finished your program. Was that like a 1.5 year program there?
Yeah.
And then, like you said, you went to Grounded. And what did you do at Grounded?
So at Grounded, I was a project coordinator assistant with Green Places initiatives. So at that time, Green Places was essentially a program that consisted of partnering with the youth service provider and what is often environmental justice neighborhood and looking to identify a parcel that could be revamped through community input and having that process be driven in part by the youth service provider. So like Gwen's Girls or Boys and Girls Club, churches, all kinds of nonprofits we partner with in different communities in Allegheny County. So that was probably 2 years of doing that and being able to work in like maybe 16 different neighborhoods. I think during that time, gardens would come up here and there intermittently. And it just was something that started as like a novel idea, but the more I looked into it and started to reflect on my own personal experiences and losing family members due to health issues, it was like, oh wait, so I'm already like utilizing these skills and understanding. And if I add this additional component in, now it unlocks this whole other avenue and discourse around land use and our connection with land. So I think, for me, that's where the switch happened. And the funny thing about that time is Grounded or GTech and Grow Pittsburgh shared a building. So I just went upstairs. So that was cool.
Okay, so you worked with me doing food policy, and I remember you borrowed books and stuff, and you brought him back, which was great. I was talking to a colleague of mine. She's like, oh yeah, I remember him. He's the only one that brought books back.
Yeah.
Doing the food policy work with me and learning about, the land access and the policy stuff. And it was all associated, for me, it was all associated with food. But for you at that time, it wasn't necessarily?
No.
Okay.
No, there wasn't like an explicit connection I was making. I don't think at that time, food really didn't become something I was even thinking about till maybe halfway through my time at GTech or Grounded. Yeah, I just remember having a talk with like Andrew Butcher. He was like, gardens are like the Cadillac of third space projects from like a labor intensity, high maintenance standpoint. And I think there's a valid point with that. He wasn't that far off in his sentiments. I just recall like there being a time where it's like, oh, we should really do more of this. It's just like, upstairs they kind of had that on lock. Yeah, I think that really
upstairs meaning Grow Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it's like Grow Pittsburgh. Yeah, so I mean, it's just like, all right, cool. Like yeah.
That's cool. So then, what did you do at Grow Pittsburgh?
So at Grow Pittsburgh, I served as the flagship garden educator. So I had 2 schools that I would conduct classes around agricultural cooking throughout the year, Dilworth and Colfax. And that was a cool experience. Dilworth being a primarily African-American student base, and then Colfax being probably one of the most diverse schools, certainly in a city. I mean, I would venture to say upwards of 45% of the students that go there have another language as their primary language. So I think that was interesting because we did tend to like make recipes from around the world. So like sometimes I remember vividly we did something in Ethiopia to kill gomen with injera, which is a fermented wheat bread. And the students, injera? No, we bought it from Tana, a local Ethiopian restaurant. But 2 of the students were Ethiopian, so they taught us like some words. It was like a whole thing. Like, it was
that's
cool.
Great.
So it's like that was always like a cool part of working at Colfax, and just in general getting to get the kids outside and letting them just like let loose and learn about nature, which for me was an opportunity to, I think, recreate experiences I had growing up. My mom had me young, so subsequently childcare was something that was like done through cousins, but also like summer camps, after school programs. So being like years later, be in a similar position or give some of those same experiences to kids, I think was another piece of why that was gratifying and really pushed me in the direction of working with youth more as it pertains to working with land. And, again, it's just like each phase of this is like another piece gets picked up and like trying to merge it and figure out how these things come together in unique ways. And a lot of that's been facilitated through opportunities to work for different environmental nonprofits.
That's exactly why I wanted to meet with you and have you on my podcast, because you've put all the pieces together, which is really fascinating to me. So after Grow Pittsburgh, and by the way, did you know that I started the edible schoolyard at Dilworth?
No.
Yeah, I worked for Grow Pittsburgh in 2006, 7, and 8,
Oh,
and we
nice.
did the garden there and the garden at Faison,
Yeah.
which is phased out now. But yeah, I
That's what's
started
up.
that one, and that was really crazy because the principal was not very into it at the time. She had me look up the pollen count because she was afraid that her students were going to be allergic to the pollen that was created by these new plantings. And
Oh,
so
wow.
when I found out that carrots have the highest pollen count, it's like, but who lets carrots go to seed? Like, who lets carrots flower? So
Yeah. It's kind of at the point. Yeah.
yeah, that's cool that you worked there. I like Dilworth School a lot.
Yeah, me
The
too.
teachers and the parents are all really great.
Yeah, they have this assembly hall thing they do. They like sing in the morning.
And the drums.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
it's great. Love that. I wish I had school like that.
Well, you say you wish you were back in school?
You know what? It doesn't even matter if I'm in school or not. I wish I had a place to go in the morning and start my day that way.
Okay.
That is fantastic. It's a great way to start your day. It gets the energy up. Everybody's sort of like, singing together.
Definitely.
And it's lovely. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I love it. All right. So you did the rounds, you were putting stuff together. And then I feel like when you started working at Oasis, you were more in a leadership position there.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So yeah, talk about that because I feel like you did some really amazing leaps and bounds, not just for your career and your personal growth, but for the organization you worked for.
Yeah, I think before we get there, I think it's worth noting that during the time I grew Pittsburgh, I'm also introduced to Ayana Jones. I think that's also worth mentioning because I think you and her were like the first few people I had like extensive dialogue with. And I think her serving as like a mentor and then me ultimately becoming a board member for Sankofa Village Community Gardens. At one point I was even on the committee for bugs. So there were like some involvements I had tangential to some of the jobs that helped kind of accentuate the understanding and sense of how to go about work. So once I moved, well, not moved, but began to work in Homewood at Oasis, I think having had some of those relationships and sense of what was going on, I was essentially coming in to like optimize like the land that the church had. I mean, at that time, there really wasn't a vision for what Oasis Farm and Fishery would be outside of providing nutritional education programming to Faison and Lincoln on an after-school or summer camp basis. Despite having a solar panel, passive solar greenhouse, bread oven, totaling $500,000 in investment capital, in part by Pitt, well, in large part through Pitt's philanthropy. So by the time I come in, some of that infrastructure's there. We have these programs, but there's just a lot of lawn, a lot of opportunity through my lens, and I was encouraged to create Oasis in Homewood.
Think big.
Yeah, so
And you did.
So we were able to, do a lot to bolster the capacity to grow. And I think the pandemic was an interesting time because at this point, this was like my first year. So 2019 going into 2020, the pandemic happens and then, the world shuts down and all of the departments for Oasis projects stopped besides the farm. So people that were furloughed actually were hired on to assist with the farm. And, there's a lot of different funding happening to aid with this and that. So subsequently, we were able to get a lot of money to build out our ground capacity. I mean, I want to say during that 4-month time period, we probably built 40 raised beds, and we would go on to plant 60 fruit trees, kind of create like an edible forest. And, today, Oasis is capable of growing upwards of 2,000 pounds, which for an urban garden on less than an acre isn't bad, especially once you factor in the fruit tree piece of this and the factors hydroponic / aquaponic system. So yeah, that was like a very just like iterative process. I think there was just like a general sense of like, let's just make the most out of space we have. And I think that became part of the parameters to kind of inform how we moved forward. Because with our higher ups, they just really wanted to see food being grown, for the space to look nice, inviting, and for program to be happening. And there were a lot of there's a lot of room to play within that type of structure. So I think that's a big part in why we were able to do what we were able to over those 4 years, so 4.5 years. So yeah.
So during pandemic, the way you explained it made me think that the people who were working in the office for your organization came out to work on the farm.
No,
Okay.
it was like people from the cafe. Some of the part-time folks that were furloughed were able to roll into working at the farm. I think a lot of those people came from the cafe. Some people came from after-school programs, but we really didn't have like folks from HR coming down. I guess particularly during that time, where there's like a lot of just anxiety around, the ability for this virus to spread and a lot of the unknowns.
It was terrifying.
Yeah, we had a lot of people that were elders that were working in the office. So I think for several reasons, we didn't get a lot of folks from the administrative side of things coming out. But
so it must have been a really good, for the people who were able to come out and participate, that had to be a great community outlet and to see people and talk to people. Yeah. I know we had a situation in our neighborhood where we'd all go out into the alley and hang out, and there was 30 of us that would gather from around the community, and just, we had space but just having another person to talk to in life, in life in person was amazing.
Yeah, so I think that was cool, especially for me, getting to chop it up with people on a job that aren't farmers. They are coming with totally different sets of interests. So it made for a cool working experience for that time period. Just a lot of different reference points for even the work we were doing. You gotta see aha moments with folks, and people make different reference points to other industries or crafts. It was cool. So that was Oasis. And we were able to partner with a lot of different people as well. Chatham was a big player in helping us expand our growing capacity. I should mention during that time, we created a CSA program called the Veggie Share, which consisted of us, or Oasis Farm and Fishery, Grow Pittsburgh, Operation Better Block, and Chatham, where we pulled our produce and were able to serve residents from Homewood and surrounding areas. So that was cool how that came about. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it just taught me that based on the way nonprofit sector is situated, sometimes the issue at hand isn't able to fully be solved for reasons due to structure, capacity, political will, and part funding. And I think food access in the city is not exempt from that. So there's a lot of money that goes towards people growing food, and a lot of conversation around that. And I think the pandemic highlighted that, because you had people, councilwomen in particular, who were very passionate about having more farms, more urban gardening, but overlooking just all the infrastructure and time and labor that goes into having that done successfully, specifically in a way that feeds people on a consistent basis year round in our climate. But furthermore, recognizing we don't need to actually grow more food to feed people, because there's enough food already being grown. So it's more of a distribution issue than a production issue. So I think the issue of food excess in some ways is completely mischaracterized from the beginning, because we make it seem like there's not enough of it being grown. But on the other hand, maybe it's just because that, I guess, growing the food is a quicker way for gratification. It's in 8 months, we can grow 1,000 pounds and say we fed X amount of people and feel we're moving in the right direction. And I'm not saying that's not conducive in some degree, but I think as I've grown, matured, and been working in this sector, programs can only do so much on a systemic level. So, I think ultimately, maybe 2 years in to working at Oasis, some of my involvement at the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council, people have different like macro level conversations. And I forget exactly what spurred me to think about it, but looking at like some of the guidelines by the USDA and what they recommend for folks, which at the time, and this might still be the case, like 1.5 pounds of fruits and vegetables per day. So in the neighborhood I'm working in, Homewood at the time, we have about 4,500 people. So it's just like, all right, what would it look like to feed everybody for the whole year based on their guidelines? And when you do the math, you get to around like 2.3 million pounds, roughly speaking. If you factor in the number of residents, the amount of produce they recommend by the number of days. And then you say, okay, how many farms are in Homewood that could do it? 6. So now we get to 235,000 pounds, roughly each farm will have to grow. So it became apparent in that time that,
That's a lot of food, and you're at 1,000.
Yeah.
With all of your
it's not even a
out.
drop. It's crazy. So I think, in some ways it kind of is a gut punch. It's like, wow, to think that so much was going into trying to address it this way, and to kind of have a moment of clarity, assess like how, at least at that time, it felt like futile to say, okay, we can't grow our way out of this, but the things that would need to happen for people to be able to get fed on a daily basis don't feel attainable, isn't being discussed nearly as much. Although there are entities that do like fruit reclaim work, like a 412 Food Rescue. I'm not sure if like Reclaim the World does some of that as well, but
the food bank does some of that.
Food bank. Mm-hmm. So I think it's happening in different levels, but it always felt like complementary or like adjacent to, again, growing the food, supporting farmers. Like, so I think, and I don't necessarily know why that is. I can only assume. Again, I could see, because it's, you could see a quicker return on like starting a program. So I guess to bring this full circle, I think, although you can't feed America from urban gardening, or just to zoom in on Pittsburgh, it's like the footprint for like a completely green landscape of Homewood. I mean, this is not possible. So I guess like a lot of things are pointing to just, realization of like the limitation on a particular approach. And despite there being a lot of like passion around it and virtue in it, I think that's part of the reason that I began to, I guess, become less gung-ho about urban ag as a whole and its viability. I think for me, as someone who aspired to be a farmer, recognizing like through countless meetings and research reports and going to conferences like PASA and NISOG that, just to even make $25,000 a year, which is, sub minimum wage level income, you're talking about 60 hours a week on a mid 2-3 acre farm, which is like, you might as well set yourself on fire. And I think especially someone coming from a disenfranchised background where I don't have any like land I'm going to inherit, anything like that. It's just like, it's not really tenable. And if you consider the history of our country, people typically move into places or regions where there's the ability to have a viable income. From the gold rush to, a lot of free slaves movement up north. I mean, even to this day, you talk about immigration, like people are going where they perceive there to be opportunity. And I don't know that outside of maybe cannabis, agriculture, or like agritourism maybe is going to allow that for a lot of people of color, particularly Black people. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just interviewing the Who Cooks For You farmers, and they were like, well, it could be profitable, but it's a lifestyle. Like, it's a whole, like, you're not going to, like, live how you're living now and then just make, that's not your income. It's a whole, like, you've committed your life and your being, because it's 24/7.
And whoever loves you, they're in it too.
Yes.
They're co-signing.
Or you surround yourself and create family. Like, they talk about their crew, their employees as their families, because that's all these people they see.
Yeah, that feels like, we're coworkers. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's a whole other thing. So, okay, so now you work for Operation Better Block and you're running their Junior Green Corps program, which is an amazing program. You've taken that over and it's great. But earlier when we were talking about it off mic, you said, oh, they're gardeners as opposed to farmers. Now, is Oasis more of a farm or is that a garden? Or how do you differentiate the two?
Principally, if you're growing food for yourself or for other people, I think. So it's a matter of what happens once the food is harvested and the intentionality around the growing season in general. Like, like going into it. So right about now, most farmers, if they're on it, have already ordered their seeds. They know what their crop rotations are going to be. They probably have some type of cover crops in that they're going to be pulling up soon or turning over, whatever. And I think, in the context of Junior Green Corps, that's just not necessarily where we're at. Like, do we contribute some produce to the Homewood Farmers Market? Yes, but, and that's been the case. But I think it's at a level that just feels better to say it's gardening. Like, I think to say it's farming feels like a stretch. I mean, we could call it that technically, but I mean, I think if we're trying to characterize or differentiate between things, scale, processes, how much time and expertise is going to it. I think when you look at what was happening at Oasis, there was dedicated people to manage each aspect of the grind piece, as well as people specifically focused on education. We had a market, there's a CSA, we're providing produce to the cafe, in addition to the children we're working with at the after school program. So I just think our food at that point was just touching way more people. So I guess it's just a matter of the reach of the food you're growing. And if we had a broader reach, then I'd be more inclined to say we have a group of young farmers, But I think really the garden is a test ground to teach them transferable skills that will help them continue down the path of agriculture if they are so inclined, or to pivot into some other realm of horticulture or beyond, into maybe things dealing with water or air, So I think it's just trying to get the kids exposed to different vocations and careers within environmentalism, sustainability, giving them the experience and capacity through projects to impact their community. And food is, a key piece of that. I think given the other players in Homewood, we serve in a more complementary capacity to some of the more substantial food access work happening, or food apartheid work happening. Grow Pittsburgh has done a lot to help sustain the markets and bring in other entities through an asset-based way, I would say. I think we all recognize their role in a broader movement, and I think, each individual entity, like a Sankofa, like a Bugs, like a OBB, Oasis, bring their own unique strengths and characteristics. So it's been cool to see that play out through the Homewood Food Access Working Group. But yeah.
Yeah, talk about that, the Homewood Food Access Working Group. It's all the farms sort of collaborating together on stuff, and the farmers market started out of that.
Yeah, so maybe I guess closer to 10 years ago now, we began to have conversations and conduct some stakeholder engagement around food. She's someone who was working at Grow Pittsburgh at the time, and it's an influential person in the space. I think was a catalyst to what will become the Homewood Food Access Working Group, which is a conglomerate of ag-based nonprofits, community organizations, and some food adjacent organizations like FIPS. They have homegrown, but when you hear FIPS, you don't necessarily think about agriculture. It's just horticulture, broadly speaking, and all its different facets. So, Homewood's Children's Village, they do a lot of work with parents. So it ballooned out, and we were able to have some successful grants that were able to fund, being able to pay for part-time staff, pay for this, pay for that, to bolster capacity and, have a dynamic market that happens bi-weekly in Homewood. So I think it was cool to see that come about. Even though I came in well after it had already been like started and going. But even on my time to see how it's evolved, I think it's a testament to everybody involved. You know, it's not to say it hasn't had its challenges, but I think it's certainly like a case study for what that work can look like when you're trying to approach it from a collective standpoint.
If urban agriculture isn't going to feed everybody, why should we continue to invest in urban agriculture?
I mean, I guess you have to distinguish between like urban agriculture on a like individual residential level and like more of a commercial institutional level. But the reason I say that is I think about like farm to school work and the fact that, you know, if I had the opportunity to engage in like a class action lawsuit against public schools for irreparable damage to my digestive system, I would do so. Because I mean, drinking milk with every meal is crazy for me personally. So I think considering what we were told about a balanced diet, there's like a lot of work that can happen in that space given how much schools feed children and how that contributes to their overall well-being and understanding that in a world where children were being provided with locally sourced produce that were able to be cooked in a manner that preserved this like nutrient density, I think you would have less negative health outcomes in part. And I think there'd be more of a palate for vegetables, plant-based dishes, which could potentially lend itself to less cardiovascular diseases and things like that, which is like the most common killer in America, regardless of like race or gender. So I think for that reason, it's worth continuing to like explore and look at, you know, the good food purchasing program is a thing that Malik Hamilton has helped, you know, adopt and get the city on board, which is cool. I mean, I think it's just an intrinsic value of, I mean, you put food in your mouth every day. You should want that to be something that's going to nourish you, not poison you, not compromise your health. So to the extent people can learn about better ways to discern or differentiate and grow their own food or source it, I think that that's a net positive. But to what extent is it possible to feed them through the year, which is something we hit on.
We put that, that's gone.
I think that's where it's the issue. So I guess, but again, like people don't lead with, hey, super important you know about these things. However, you're still gonna have to go to a grocery store, all these Eastern Food Co-op,
farmers market, whatever. Yeah.
I mean, even farmers markets, like, you know, again, like I think people, your average American diet wouldn't be accommodated by a farmer's market.
You're right. It's the pre-packaged process.
Like now, if you tell me there's a butcher and somebody has some chicken, there's bread, now you start, because we're just talking about vegetables. Like we're not talking about grain, protein. In most instances, like which are things people tend to eat, probably more so than vegetables, unfortunately. There's a divergence between people, how people like to eat, and then what most urban farmers can provide on a like consistent basis, which are like leafy greens, some herbs, some fruit and crops, you know, so that's kind of like, you know, I think part of the challenge too. But I guess the value is, and being able to like have like these demonstration projects that can spark people's interest and lend itself to them learning more about how to nourish themselves in a healthy way. And I think there's just a net value to that. But that's also kind of like lead me to think about like, you know, people go into food from my observation for like political reasons, for environmental reasons, like they just love being outside, whatever. Or like they're looking to be in community, forge community, cultivate it, tap into it. And not to say like these are isolated, they could be entwined. Oftentimes it's like multiple, if not all three. But those feel like three distinct reasons for what I assess people to be, like people's entry points into urban ag. I've often found kind of hit on one of those 3 points. And I think that's an interesting piece. But yeah, I think, you know, it's something that everyone should know and be in tune with to some extent. And I guess like in a parallel universe, if everyone with a lawn grew what they could grow based on what that lawn could provide, maybe produce would be cheaper. Maybe Monsanto and some of these big corporate entities will have less of a stronghold on the food supply, on seeds. Because, if you follow like our current economic system, like the role supply and demand plays into it, if there was less demand for certain commodities, maybe that would have some type of net impact on, the way the food system looks as a whole. But that feels like, for several reasons, is not something that seems very feasible for every lawn to have like a maxed out garden, like whatever that looks like, because lawns are
and you have to tend to it. It's not like you just plant seeds and they grow. So that's a big ask for a lot of people. So is there anything, I'm not making you do a thesis on food access and urban agriculture, I promise. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to share?
Yeah, I guess I would just say if people regardless of race or gender, coming into the food from a non-traditional background, I don't say anything I'm saying to dissuade people, but it's just to be realistic about what's possible. Success is a byproduct of expectations, and you're going into something expecting to have a gainful employment, this, that, and the third. When it's never been that, then I think we would generally call it a delusion. And I think that's really the situation, but there's so much romanticism around the industry as a whole, where people are looking at it as like a chance to escape the rat race, to break from this or that. And it's just like, no, it's just an off-ramp that immediately takes you back onto the highway that is capitalism. So I feel like, just being mindful. And I think viewing it from a lifestyle perspective is, I think, helpful, because that's the reality of it. And trying to think about, there's this concept in permaculture I learned was maximize your edge. So in nature, right, you might have an ecosystem where, a base of a mountain, a lake, and a forest border each other, and there's like a unique interplay of biodiversity. And I think as people, we come with different experiences, interests, and reference points that if you look at in that context, like where do those things meet? I think that feels like something I would just encourage people to think about, that are entering a space, want to make something happen for themselves or for their community. I would just say, think about your edges and how you can maximize that in respect to growing food or something, in any capacity. I think, because, it's easy to get, I guess, high up into this thing and work entry-level positions for several years and not necessarily any significant impact or structural change. So I think if more people coming into it were thinking that creatively, maybe you would see more iterations on what's been done. It would be more feasible to feed people through urban ag, but I think there has to be just more creative thinking and critical thinking around how we address this issue.
Yeah, agreed. A lot. And increase in political will. And what's next for Tacumba?
Well, this upcoming spring at the Artist Image Resource Center, I'll be having a kickoff to my curatorial exhibits this year, Time and Times. So be an art exhibit that'll be highlighting the relationship between time and money. So we'll be showcasing a lot of local artists of color, and I'm currently putting out a call for artists now. But by the time folks are hearing this, we'll have chosen them and be gearing up for that install. So yes, kind of what's next for me, and fatherhood. So art and kids, I guess.
Grew a different kind of little seed.
Yeah.
So exciting! I'm so excited for you. Congratulations!
You can help yourself with that part.
I just can't. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that food is cool. No secret. Eat that food with a bowl and spoon. Everyone knows that
With Bowl and Spoon is written, produced and hosted by Shelley Danko. Original theme song was written and performed by Paul LeBreeze and Friends. You can listen to With Bowl and Spoon wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, like, review and share. Follow us and send us questions or messages on Facebook and Instagram at With Bowl and Spoon. Thanks for listening.
Oh.